everyone. Welcome to the consultation for monitoring and management of groundwater in East India, organized by Switch On Foundation. I would like to thank the speakers for giving us your valuable time and creating a roadmap for the sustainable groundwater management. So, I would like to start by giving a very small presentation about our organization and the main reason why we are doing this consultation. So kindly put the questions at the end of the chat and we would get back to it later at the end of the session. Yeah, so Switch On Foundation is a leading not-for-profit social enterprise, and we have been working since 2008. The main four sectors are energy, agriculture, livelihood, and environment. So our mission is to promote sustainable livelihoods and address the environmental challenges through innovative business models and technologies. So the main sector we are working is clean energy technology, and we have created innovative financing technology where we have created a guarantee fund with the help of funds from a few US MNRE, US Embassy MNRE and PACE set of fund. So in this we have been providing energy access to small and marginal farmers, but after giving solar pumps to the farmers, we have realized that they have started facing groundwater issues in West Bengal. West Bengal was previously known as water affluent state, but recently during summer season they are facing water issues, and they are not being able to grow crops as well. But after solar pumps, some of the farmers have started growing intensively water intensive crops. So that's why we thought of starting this program Seva, which is strengthening the energy, water, and agriculture nexus. So the main three areas is energy, water, and agriculture in this program. And this whole consultation meet is to get suggestions from eminent speakers from all across the country to get consultation from each and every one of you. So Seva is sustainable because it meets the all the three objectives of the sustainability triangle: ecological conservation, social adaptation, and economical production. And there is an urgent need of monitoring and management of water because agriculture accounts for 80% of the water used, and only 24% is through surface canals, and more than 60% relies on groundwater. Also, India has started facing water stress, and in West Bengal, the farmers have already started facing the problem. So yeah, so we have planned to do the groundwater management and recharge through this three processes: as participatory groundwater management, and then constructing appropriate water conservation and recharge infrastructures, and also conduct recharge research studies. uh, so the agenda for today's consultation meet is like this. I hope this is fine with everyone. And now I would request Vinay sir, the MD of Switch On Foundation, to give a welcome address.
Very good afternoon to everyone. I'm very pleased to be a part of this August gathering. I'm very, very grateful to all of you for taking out the time for an issue which is very important and close to all our hearts. Uh, as Mashweta mentioned, that we started to promote solar pumps a few years back, and we've created a guarantee pump around it. But in this approach of promoting solar pumps, we were mindful that we did not to promote one sustainable technology. We were not creating another monster by uh, seeing that the groundwater was depleting. So it's this is it's a very new field for us, and we want to work with experts like you. We want to learn from your work, see what can apply in East India, join hands in initiatives together wherever possible, in ensuring that ultimately the objective is the same: to see how we are able to conserve the water, how we are able to protect the groundwater, which is so critical and so crucial. There are champions who've come and said that wars in coming years will be fought on water. And we're already seeing the effects of it in many blocks and districts across the country. And there is a notion that much of East India feels that we have enough water, but I think we need to really take some action when we still are able to conserve the water and be able to protect it. So I'm really happy to be part of this. I'll be listening I'll be a keen listener, and I'm looking forward to learn from all of you, 1.5 to 2 hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would request Professor P. Chinnaswamy to set the context. He is currently an assistant professor with IIT Bombay. He is associated with the Center for Technology for Alternatives for Rural Areas, Sitara Department, which focuses on enhancing sustainability in water, energy, and food for rural regions. He is an expert in surface water and groundwater modeling, water accounting and budgeting, remote sensing, and climate change impact on water resources. Sir, I would request you to share some insights.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see me? Can I be visible? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I wasn't preparing for a presentation, but yes, it will be very nice for me to share our research, what has been done for groundwater, impacts, especially for farmers, because we work with minorities and rural farmers. And also, I would like to share what is actually going on. So India extractor of groundwater in the world, and we do extract groundwater in combination and in excess of China and US put together. And that is also on numbers which we don't have clarity on, because even surface water is very hard to monitor, but groundwater becomes more complex because it's under the ground. We don't know who's pumping. And so there is a lot of complexities in monitoring it. So like the previous speaker spoke, there are technologies to help farmers, but then we are also opening another can of worms. So we have to be very careful in, but also on top of that, I would say for sustainable natural resources, and of which water is very important. So in terms of East India, in 2005, I think the groundwater market was opened. And one important aspect of the groundwater market is the technology and engineering has grown leaps and bounds, which means that you can spend less for a motor and less energy for a motor to get more water out. So the technology and engineering is constantly evolving, which gets it more access for the groundwater for everyone. Groundwater is also a climate change buffer. A lot of people forget this, like when we have a climate change extreme, it could be flood or it could be drought. When there's too much water, like in Kerala and Chennai, which happened recently, you face drinking water problems. So where do you go to? You pump the groundwater and you drink it, okay? So, and in the other, there's no water, people go underground. So groundwater is being punished by climate change a lot. And the third aspect is not only floods and droughts, but because of the climate change extremes, the natural recharge which goes into the ground is slowed down. So also you're depleting your aquifer, which is your groundwater bank account, but also the natural money or the salary which comes into your account is depleting. So it is very important to manage this. And in 2005, we did a study in West Bengal. We noticed that the groundwater, people think in Ganges Basin, you don't have to worry about groundwater because there's a lot of surface water which will recharge the groundwater. But that was not the case. The data showed clearly that with the increase of number of pumpers, the level of groundwater also decreased. So that is the first concern. The second concern is, sticking to my time, the water quality aspect, the groundwater quality aspect. So as you keep on reducing the aquifer or your water storage in your groundwater, it also starts to mingle with the natural contaminants, which is your geogenic materials, your rocks, salt, etc. So this actually releases a lot of salts in the water, and that is where we found the arsenic pollution in East India. The west, you would, so as the water level is coming down, the water contains more fluorides in Rajasthan and Gujarat, which if you drink, your bones get dissolved. So, and that is what is happening there. A lot of people are affected. So it is not only a quantity issue, a quality issue also. With all these rainwater harvesting and recharge structures, what is happening is water is pushed faster into the ground. when you push faster into the ground, that also actually consumes your water. So people have to be very careful in doing this. So coming back, it starts with the user, the demand side. Okay, so we cannot always go to the government to ask for them to supply these management activities, because you cannot control how and where you put a pump. Again, as I said, the cost of the pump has become so low that everyone has multiple pumps, not one pump, two, three pumps, right? So, and if you come to Maharashtra, where I practice, there's a lot of farmer suicide also associated with groundwater networks. So it's a big issue in India. And we have to start with the demand side management, and that is where the NGO sector plays a big role. There's billions of dollars, it released $1 billion for groundwater management, which was supposed to come before the COVID, but yeah, everyone knows COVID has delayed it. So it's $1 billion just for groundwater, and there's multiple organizations working on it, like bilateral. So it has to start with the demand side, where you go to the farmers and work with them to find different solutions, sustainable technologies, and also attitude. This is the social science part, where farmers need to think beyond the cash crop, the things that should support the farmers to grow these kind of crops, where it is less intensive on water. So groundwater is being punished. We cannot go like this, because what water we are using now maybe it recharged 100 years ago. No one has the data on it. Again, data is very scarce when we talk about groundwater, and that is where we do a lot of research. We use both crowdsourcing, which is farmer collected data. We also use satellite data, Central Groundwater Board data, CWC, which is the river data, to understand what is happening in the ground. In the Gujarat and Rajasthan regions, the Australian government, where we develop an app and then teach the farmers. So the other aspect is like academics like me, if we go to the field, maybe 2-3 days the farmers would listen, then they will do what they want to do. So it is better to train a farmer and let them train. And I think that is where NGOs like Switch On would come in. In Gujarat, we work with ACT is an NGO, and DSM. So there's a lot of other NGOs, Dan Foundation, Dahod, NM Sadhguru Foundation. So these NGOs work very closely with the farmers and bring them what is necessary to save the groundwater. I think they should also mingle, and a call to all NGOs is to mingle with academics a lot, because your field experience is very valuable. And that is what Sitara is about. Sitara is a bridge between academics and NGO. We have around 300 NGOs where we send our IIT students to the NGOs to work on the groundwater related issues. And with this, I would like to hear more on the aspects and ground realities from different organizations present today.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very insightful. Now, I would request Swapna ma'am from FES to share her insights. Swapna Sarangi ma'am is a team leader in the regional office of Orissa in FES. She has been working in FES for past 21 years and leads their work in supporting local communities to improve governance of common resources such as land, water, and forests across the states. Ma'am, now to share your experiences.
Thank you, Mashota. Yeah, I would be very happy, because I'm so sorry that I don't have a presentation to share with you all. But I'll just talk about the experience of mine working in the state of Odisha around water. The problem with the region is it's a high rainfall zone, as in comparison to many of the states in India. Odisha receives a good rainfall. We get about 1200 to 1400 mm rainfall. We do not have enough infrastructure to catch hold of this rainfall that is there, for which many of parts of my state faces drought situation. So while working with local communities, we had tried looking at issues around water. We figured out there are a couple of inherent issues. For example, if in a state like Odisha, it's a paddy dominant state, it's a mainly rain-fed agriculture, but completely dominated by paddy. Everybody wants to do paddy, and we never realized that paddy is also a water intensive. And in the absence of a proper irrigation infrastructure, till the practice is to have flood irrigation. So one field will get the water full, then it will overflow to the next field, and then
Uh, Ma'am, we've lost you. Sapna ji, we've lost you. Sapna ji, we're not able.
I think we have lost Swapnaji. Now I would request Dr. Debashish Sen from PSI, People Science Institute, to present his present his presentation. And Dr. Devashish Sen is the director of People Science Institute in Dehradun. He received his PhD in 2015. In addition to his research on the system of rice intensification, SRI, he has been instrumental in promoting and successfully upscaling SRI among farmers in the Himalayan states of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Sir, it would be great if you present.
Hi everyone. Can you please allow screen sharing?
Yes, sir. We have given this.
Yeah. So I thought that we would get the chance later on because Aquadem being there, I would have preferred to Siddharth to go ahead. But anyway, so I would request Varghese to do the initial part of the presentation. What we are trying to share here is, first of all, a little bit about PSI organization and then getting into the participatory groundwater management approach that partners have advocated through the technical support of Aquadam. And then in the context of Eastern India, what are the possibilities if we want to address the groundwater extraction problems, especially focusing on sustainable agri-water management practices.
Uh,
Yes, Varghese.
should, yeah, okay. Thank you, Devashish ji. Uh, Good evening, everyone. So thought that our chance will come after Himanshu sir or Siddharth bhai, but still, uh, starting with this presentation is like since we are talking about sustainable water management practices. So what we think that, and the case study which I'm going to share here also, that in agriculture area, just because we know that 85% of irrigation comes from groundwater itself in India, and even it would be more if we'll quantify it properly, but still it's do the demand regulation part. So it will be important, I mean it will be a, very successful, we can change it successfully, the thing, I mean the aquifer stress which is going on nowadays. So like starting with PSI, that PSI, it is established in 1988, and with the vision of nation building. And if you can see there, that mission was just help to eradicate poverty through empowerment of rural, poor, and productive, sustainable resources. And if we are talking about equity in society, not whenever we talk about that, that there should be a society which is considering people equally, and where there will be people who are economically strong and having proper food and all that. So for that it was started, and basically approach was science for the people, just because most of the time when it's like rocket science, whenever we think that we are talking about science. So the science is all about rocket sciences and all that. but by the people, for the people, and of the people. Science for all. So it was the approach, and basically geographical spread is all over India, with focus of Himalayan and Bundelkhand region. And the study which I'm going to share here is from partners, other NGOs partners we were having with some of the government departments also. So basically the whole idea was based on PGWM concept, that is participatory groundwater management. So orientation of community, creating and strengthening the water user group, participatory resources, participatory resource mapping of the area, community driven groundwater monitoring, aquifer mapping, delineation of recharge and discharge. Advanced part was water balance exercise, pumping test to determine aquifer properties, just to get the idea, just to quantify the whole water in the aquifer. It's like if we want to know that how much water we have in our aquifer during monsoon season or post monsoon or pre monsoon, then we can use it properly. So it is kind of making invisible visible. So that's why that quantification of aquifer, quantification of groundwater in aquifer is needed. Then only you can plan for it. And then groundwater recharge estimation by using water level fluctuation approach, crop water budgeting by farmers group, para worker appointments, and with the responsibilities and preparation of water security plan and its periodic revision. So basically this was the approach, and the principle was just to consider, I mean, just to give idea to the people that water, just to shift the whole paradigm from source to resource, and that is our aquifer. The whole aquifer is considered as a resource, and people must know about that. And again, the proper use, the management of that resource, I mean, which precisely. So this was the whole idea and principle, and the agenda of this, as I said earlier, that making that invisible thing, that groundwater thing, visible, private resource to common property resource, and supply augmentation and demand regulation. And this thing I would like to put a stress upon on this. It's like supply augmentation. We always, whenever we talk about working on any groundwater scheme, supply augmentation is always the part of that. But demand regulation, how it is, in next 2 or 3 slide we are going to see that. And yeah, the PSI initiated the PGWM pilot in Shopur MP, Yavatmal Maharashtra, and Udaipur Rajasthan, with partnership of local NGOs, and Aquadem was again our technical partner in that. And those in those NGOs, FES was our partner in Udaipur and Yavatmal district, and in Shopur and Shivpuri, Parhit and Niswat was our partners. So this is the case study of Shopur district, that is in Ranipura village. There is a block named Karahal, and this is basically a central Indian tribal belt. And this was in partnership with Niswat. So that how we have selected these villages, that these villages were, there should be more than 50% population was tribal, and the most dependent, they should be dependent onto the agriculture. And uh, there might be some landless people also. I mean, we know that in tribal area there are so many landless people. So we selected some of the villages like this. So in Ranipura village, 130 Saharia families were there, and they were dependent heavily on groundwater, drinking water, and irrigation purpose. Most of the dug well they were dependent on, there were 34 dug wells altogether. Uh, yeah. And detailed study of geology. And what was our approach for that? So initially we did the detailed study of geology to understand aquifer characteristics, generating aquifer maps on within sedimentary basin. Water table monitoring was for from 10-day basis itself. It was an intensive kind of monitoring, and that helped us to understand. If you can see in the uh, 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 right side there is a graph. You can see that there are three levels you can identify onto that. One is from 298 to 292 294, and from one is 292 to 278, and another one is 274 to 264. So again, this was how we identify. I would like to come afterwards, but here you can see in Ranipura monthly, down there you can see one arrow. So that was the time when we intervene in this area. Initially we were taking intervene in terms of engineering interventions. So then you can see the impacts also, that in the lean period the water table has gone up for next 2 months, after two for next 2 years. So again, water table monitoring us to understand the aquifer characteristics. Pumping test was done for transity and storativity, just for water balancing, just to quantify the So, whereas it concern about Central Indian tribal belt, so most of the people there, they grow Rabi, they are heavily dependent onto the Rabi crop. So, in that time, what we did, we compensated around 0.06 based on water budgeting, and sharing that water budgeting data with the people, and making them understand that this is the this is the total potential is of our aquifer, and we should change in our cropping pattern, like, and it must not hamper to the economic growth to the people meanwhile. So again, groundwater recharge plan was prepared in consultation with village community, and meet up the demand supply gap. Next, please. Devashish ji. Yeah, I think we skip one in between.
So this is next, Varghese.
Okay, yeah. So process of water busting based on active community participation. So as I said, that community participation is the key. I mean, until and unless we are not giving feasible onto the ground to replicate any kind of model. So as I said earlier, that it was a pilot initially, so it was really important. The community participation was really important. So protocols developed to regulate demand prohibition of digging of dug wells and tube wells. No dug well has been dug or bore well has been dug in last 4 years in that area, in Ranipura area. So there were 13 subgroups having 2 or 3 farmers per group, using limited numbers of well for irrigation on sharing basis. And was developed by villager to prevent excess use of water without hampering their economic growth. Right side you can see again that initially in 2015 and 16, total cropped area in the village was around it was around 150 170 hectare, and after that it gone up to around 330 hectare. And meanwhile, simultaneously, you can see the change in the cropping pattern. Wheat has gone up a bit, but gram, mustard, bajra, soybean, and til, these are less water intensive crops, been promoted in the area. So it was made sure that there must not be any kind of economic there must not be any kind of hampering in economic growth. Meanwhile, when you are changing the cropping pattern, cultivated area almost increased doubled, as I said earlier. So a direct impact of was that there was 40% less migration in the village, just because people was working there, and they were getting work there. I mean, people who used to go outside for the work, they were getting work inside the village itself. So there was 40% of less migration was observed. Sir, there was last one was missed. And yeah, 40% villagers are doing organic farming, also saving water, and saving water as well as money spent on the fertilizer. So these were the clear cut outcomes which we have seen after the project. And there is a village user group who are working intensively, and after the project, since we have finished with this project, last month itself, but they are still working, and they are spending their money. Recently what happened that there was 2 or 3 crucial hand pumps was there, and they just based on their money, that user group money, they have just repaired that. So the thing is that we have done something onto the ground, and it is going on with the people's participation. So that's what I would like to say. Over to Devashish. Thank you.
Thanks, Verghese. So in the context of Eastern India, we all know that now this second green revolution is being proposed and it's being promoted. And that, as stated earlier, that much of the this effort will be involving the uh, use of the groundwater for irrigation. As the different data they show, I'm not going into the details of each of them, that only 39% the net groundwater availability is right now being used. So there's a lot of potential that is being seen, and that there is low groundwater development and low water productivity and in the different states of the eastern India. But at the same time, a study done by IIT Kharagpur and Athabasca University of Canada, this shows that there is a loss of utilizable groundwater storage at the rate of 5 cubic kilometer per year. So it's a matter of concern if this second green revolution is going to be promoted as planned. The second thing, which is again, if irrigation is going to be promoted and groundwater is going to be a major component of that, what is the crops? What are the major crops that are grown in the area? So in that we see that in the Kharif season, particularly crops like rice, groundnut, and cotton, they are water guzzlers. It has already been mentioned that paddy is grown in all the 3 seasons, but besides that, even groundnut and cotton grown in different states are also consuming a lot of water. And we can see that the percentage area
Now I would request Dr. Himanshu Kulkarni from Aquadam to present. Dr. Himanshu Kulkarni has led a not-for-profit knowledge institution and think tank on groundwater since 1998. He is a hydrogeologist by qualification and has been working on aquifers and groundwater across India's diverse groundwater typology for more than 35 years. He has also taught me in my post-graduation regarding groundwater in my course Water Policy and Governance from TIS Mumbai.
Himanshu, you're muted. Thank you. I think you're still muted.
Sorry about that.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yes, very quickly, a little more on groundwater in Eastern India. I am not going to talk about our work or about a case study, but just a few ideas that come to mind on this particular subject. So to begin with, a short introduction to Aquadam. We work across India. We work exclusively on the subject of groundwater, and we look at many other questions, many other topics through the lens of groundwater. We are both a think tank and also an action research based organization. working on science, on the science of groundwater. We work in practice. We work on the policy side. We work with, I mean, to boast a little, over the last 20 years, all our work is in partnership and collaboration. We don't work alone. We don't have a single project where we worked alone. And the partnership is usually on one side with communities and on the other side with organizations that work with communities. Interestingly, in this meeting, we've possibly worked with every single person. That apart, our focus on community members as close to each other as possible. The map on the right is, again, a map that we have helped evolve, or I would say we've developed over the last 20, 25 years on the basis of experience. And it's, in some ways, it's a preferred typology map of India. So having said that, let me go on to make a few 5 or 6 main points today. So if you look at the problem of groundwater in India, and I think you've already had a background to what groundwater resources mean in India. So it's really a problem of transitions in increasing water demand. And this is a very quick analysis that my colleagues did based on various data sets, mainly agricultural data sets for many years. And if you actually look at a change in cropping pattern, the trade-off between a drop in millet production from the 1950s till about now, and the rise of other crops, especially paddy, wheat, oil seeds, pulses, everything else. And if you actually estimate the footprint in terms of what this means. So first and foremost, this means the emergence of irrigated crops at the expense of nutri-cereals, which were dominantly rain-fed. The overall footprint of this also means that in the last 50, 60 years, we've actually seen a changing agroeconomy of crops that demand more and more water. So 400 billion cubic meters was added as crop water demand over a 66-year period in India. And okay, I'm sure part of it came from mainstream irrigation through dams and canals, but a large part of this came from the groundwater story. Now, where are we now? This is, of course, the latest version of Central Groundwater Board's data. The only thing is I have plotted it in a different way. I've plotted it in shades of red or pink. As you go from the northwest towards the east. At the same time, what you can pick up is even in the east, you have emerging shades of dark pink, which means that the stage of groundwater development in the east, especially with the 2017 latest CGWB analysis, you can see that a lot of districts, especially in West Bengal, parts of Jharkhand, parts of Bihar, are turning pink. Means that over the last 3 or 4 assessments, we are actually seeing a greater and greater groundwater development in the region. Unfortunately, I must admit that in the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of policy statements made from very high towers of bringing the green revolution to Eastern India by becoming more aggressive on groundwater extraction. And I don't want to go into the details of those, but an aggressive groundwater extraction means there are going to be consequences, like water wells going dry, groundwater contamination emerging even more strongly than what we have today, competition and conflict over groundwater. This is, of course, a picture from Rajasthan, but maybe another 10 years, the drying up of rivers is seldom attributed to the question of groundwater depletion. Now, let me also highlight another important feature of Eastern India, that unlike Punjab, Haryana, parts of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, with groundwater exploitation, and we still talk about people drilling deeper and deeper and deeper and getting water at, of course, a higher social and economic price. Eastern India is dominated by what are called hard rocks. You know, crystalline, very old, hard, metamorphic, igneous rocks. There are, of course, other rocks. There's also a part of the alluvial system. But again, if you look at just the pink, one kind of a rocks system, I'm going to now show you 3 examples from 3 villages, just simplified for our own understanding. So the 3 villages are Bubui, Churinchoro, Talaburu. And these are villages where we worked on an international project under ACIR with the Australian folks' helps. Pradhan was our partner. And without going into the details, I'll talk a little bit about what I want to bring out from this. All of them are underlain by the same type of aquifer system. In the first case, and we've done a very detailed groundwater balance in all these villages. In fact, we do a very detailed groundwater balance in all the places that we work, because a water budget is incomplete without a water balance. And a water budget in India, especially in regions which are so dependent on groundwater, will be incomplete unless and until we do a systematic groundwater balance. And I'm not going to go into that process. What I'm going to show you are outputs from a groundwater. Arguments. First and foremost, in the first village, you can say that the village is significantly irrigated. It is perhaps as irrigated as some of the villages that we work in places like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, or for that matter, with Vasan's partnership, we worked in Telangana. Anyway, so let's just flag this first village. Groundwater is used for drinking water purposes, domestic purposes, agriculture, essentially applied water, and therefore it's significantly irrigated. Now, the other interesting factor about this groundwater balance, and this is for 2014-15, is that it changes over time. In the same village, in 15-16, 16-17, and 17-18, it's just that I've plotted it as histograms. The total aquifer storage, which is a function of the aquifer properties or rock types, remains constant. What changes is recharge. What changes is extra natural discharge of groundwater. And therefore, what changes is also in terms of the groundwater index. The Central Groundwater Board uses at the scale of blocks or talukas. Aquifers in this village called Bubui are so dynamic that over a period of 4 years, you see a change where in the first year, it is overexploited. In the third and the fourth years, it becomes semi-critical. Anyway, I won't go into the details with the other two. With the other 2 villages, in Churinchara, for example, the groundwater balance in 14-15 completely changed. What it shows is it's marginally irrigated. And much of the groundwater use is for drinking water purposes and domestic purposes, marginally applied in agriculture for irrigation. In the third village, there is hardly any groundwater usage in agriculture. It is entirely rain-fed. And in some ways, if you look at the yellow here, which is 84.7%, it is dominantly in the form of evapotranspiration and base flows. So even from a sort of ecosystem point of view, this village has a much larger role to play in terms of what aquifers contribute to the ecosystem. So there's that trade-off as well. Now, one of the reasons I'm actually showing this is unless you go down to the right scale, you how diverse things are, how diverse the problems are, and because you have such a great deal of diversity, you require different strategies of managing groundwater. In the hard rock regions of Eastern India, for example, you probably have annual recharge cycles, where the shallow aquifers get recharged every year, they get discharged every year. In the alluvial plains, in some of the regions where I believe Switch On is also working, in West Bengal, for example, aquifers have higher storage capacities, and their storages have possibly been accumulated over large periods of time. Their cycles of recharge are also over multi-year periods. Now, one of the fascinations in this world today is for recharge, and the whole idea of mission mode recharge. So, what is mission mode recharge? Mission mode recharge has come to exemplify, and I'm sorry to use the word exemplify, about pushing water pipe. Okay, and that's the end of the story. And I think it's important when we look at the Eastern Indian region to do away with this paradigm and think about recharge a little systematically of addition of groundwater to the existing storage in the aquifer, or addition of water to the existing storage in an aquifer. And it's something you can't do everywhere. It's something which needs a very strategic approach. And therefore, if we look at even at an internationally accepted system of recharge called Managed Aquifer Recharge, or MAR, it has several components. It has a catchment treatment component. It has a patch component. It has what is called the subsurface storage component, so understanding the aquifers. And it has a recovery component, recovery in terms of usage. And recovery, and this is a very symbolic diagram that it's not, at the moment, recharge is really about number 2, number 3, and possibly number 4. I think it's important for us to understand that a managed aquifer recharge process is also what happens to that groundwater post recharge. And therefore, when we deal with recharge, we need to deal with aquifers. And aquifers are entities in many dimensions. They also signify transitions. Again, an old favorite that we developed some years back, where it's not just about the relationship between recharge and extraction. It's really about how this relationship unfolds in terms of the changing storage or if an aquifer depletes, there are many that get impacted. Abstraction, economy, water security, water quality, energy, and the ecosystem services that an aquifer provides. So this whole concept raises the question of 3 elements: sustainability, equity, and efficiency in groundwater management. To end though, just with a couple of slides, my suggestion at this point in time would be to also look at the question on whether recharge alone is going to be enough to solve the problem. I believe the answer is no. Because even if you follow a process of systematic aquifer recharge, which is managed aquifer recharge, you will still need to be engaged with the question of how do you manage the recharge water? Essentially, how do you manage aquifer storage? How do you manage extraction? And in order to look at these 3 collectively, bring in resources, you need to build large-scale collaboration and participation for decision-making, evidence for which exists in our participatory groundwater management program, the revitalization of rain-fed agriculture network that Ravindra will talk about, the spring share management program up in the mountains that we are working with, along with many of the organizations here, the participatory groundwater quality improvement program, again, that a lot of organizations are involved in. So without collaboration and participation, especially for decision making, where you're enabling communities to take the right, more robust decisions, I think is the way to go, whereby you're actually able to address the challenges around equitability, efficiency, and sustainability together. To end what, this is exactly the same thing, but I'll end with this little graph, what I'm trying to say. So if you take a typical Indian village anywhere, and if you look at a broad sort of system of cropping today, and if you look at a sort of water budget on the demand side to begin with, what is the demand? The drinking water demand, the human drinking water demand of any village today, typical village, and I've shown the metrics there, is not even 0.1 millimeter. And water scarcity, we have severe drinking water stress, so much so that we have a whole program called the Jal Jeevan Mission now. But the fact of the matter is, unless and until you're able to deal with the larger demand, which is the crop water demand, which is the demand of applied water in agriculture. Even if you bring in livestock, human household domestic water, human drinking water, this demand is hardly less than 2 millimeters, is roughly around 2 millimeters a year. The applied water demand for your rain-fed crops is also abysmally small. So if you look at the first 3-4 elements, is easily till you are able to deal with the other demands. Now, the problem is, this is like your demand. If you look at the supply side, and if you look at two different systems, and I've used the basalt system here, but a crystalline system which is largely existing in the Eastern India region is roughly the same. Then a typical shallow aquifer, unconfined aquifer in a basalt can give you around 100 millimeters of water, fairly robust, fairly good aquifer. Whereas a sandy aquifer, millimeters of water. And essentially that's where the inequity begins. The inequity does not begin only with the human element. It is endowed in nature. And it's important for us to understand these inequities, to understand these diversities when we go ahead with a strategy of groundwater management, whether in the Eastern Indian region or anywhere else in India. More so the Eastern Indian region, because there is an over-aggression of groundwater development in the region, which I think we must be ready to deal with in the years to come. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, sir. It was extremely insightful. We have a lot to learn from you. And now I would request Shri Saikat Pal from Prasadi. Saikat Pal sir has an MTech in Water Resource Management from IIT Kharagpur and 19 years of experience in direct grassroots development work in East India. Sir, I would like you to present.
Yeah, so I'd like to share my screen.
Yes, we have given the permission for
yeah.
present.
So I'd like to quickly give a brief introduction of Prasadi. So my screen is visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible now.
Okay. TRASARI is an organization. This is working with uh, the team of professionals across 7 districts. Very recently, in partnership with Aquadam and PSI, you have been working with Meghalaya government on their the CLAMP project, that landscape management project. So journey has been with this water management issues. We started our work with promotion of SRI across the state, and TRASARI was the largest SRI promoter in the state of West Bengal. We were working with 24,000 SRI households across all the districts unless government brought in some sort of policy changes to incorporate SRIs in the government program. So mostly the focus was that water management aspect of SRI. Then we worked with FAO of United Nations and International Water Management Institute on agriculture water management solutions for the state of West Bengal. So West Bengal, in a sense, because switch on most of the work I have learned that some of the works are there in different districts of West Bengal. So I'd like to emphasize most on this particular state. Uh, West Bengal came up with a Groundwater Act in the year 2005. So the act was amendable, but categorically the act was about that when you wish to withdraw the groundwater, so the authority has been given to the State Water Investigation Directorate, which is a investigation wing of the Water Resources Development Department of the state. So for any kind of groundwater development work, one has to take the permission from the State Water Investigation Directorate. Electrification has to be done for pumping. The electricity department would seek that particular no objection from the State Water Investigation Directorate. So in the year 2010, 11, 12, we were working with United Nations FAO and International Water Management Institute, where we had a kind of a detailed study of the groundwater data which SWID used to collect from their inspection wells, and also we had a number of workshops across the state in different districts and regions with the groundwater stakeholders. In a sense, the water stakeholders, maybe the extension workers, researchers, research institutes, farmers, and even the market players of the water. So unfortunately, we could get a kind of a mismatch of the entire story. I mean, the data was showing, as you know, Devasis was mentioning, in development is so far some 39% average. So West Bengal was showing 44% average of the groundwater development than the potential it had. But no, everywhere we could figure out that no, there is a massive depletion and permanent depletion of the groundwater, and hardly apart from the North Bengal region. So there was hardly any place where we could see that no, the water was available within the centrifugal limit. So categorically, if I say that, you know, if you can see the map of this particular state, here we have been seeing so 4 different zones. The zones in the Himalayas. Zone 3 is the western part of the state, where Purulia, Bankura, and parts of West Midnapur these districts are falling. And zone 4 is mostly the coastal part of the state. The white portion is mostly in the central part of this, which is mostly the old alluvial and the new alluvial zone. So the surface, and I mean agroclimatically, there are 6 different regions in the state, and these regions are distinctly very different. If you look into this particular zone, which is up above, this receives plenty of rainfall. Like Darjeeling receives something around 2,500 millimeter of annual average rainfall, whereas this the part in the zone 2, the lower part of the Himalayas, it receives something around 3,000 millimeter of annual average rainfall. So somebody should be surprised that we have been receiving plenty of rainfalls and we don't have any no problem or no any issues with the availability of the water. But unfortunately, here the springs are drying up, as Himanshu was saying, shade management in the hills. Wells are drying where people queue up, in the tea garden from in the month of November to March. So they queue up from 1:30 2 a.m. in the night to take the water, because these are the well-based hydrology, the lower part of the Himalayas. So to fetch the water for their households, so that join their tea garden duties on time. And so I'd talk about the white portion a little later, but the zone 3 is the zone, the extended, the central Indian zone, Chotnagpur Plateau extension, and which is a read, and that the hydrology, I mean, it receives some kind of a rainfall of 1200 to 1300 millimeter, as like Orissa Sapna was saying about the rainfall area. And the zone 4 is the most critical zone, is in the coastal Sundarbans. So the most productive zone of West Bengal is this white part of it, where I think Suichan is also working, this particular zone. As far as if I go back to the reference of the maps we worked out with the FA of United Nations on this agriculture water scenario of West Bengal. So we actually subdivided the entire state into 15 different subzones or livelihood zones, and then we made an analysis of water availability and water use and water threats, in a sense, for the entire state. And what we could figure out with is that this is the zone, the white zone. This is called as the rice bowl of the state, and these zone generally take 3 crop, and majority of the groundwater development work has taken place in this particular area. And so when we were prioritizing that agriculture water management to be taken care of with most importance, so this particular zone came up with the priority number 1. Traditionally, this is said for West Bengal that any water issues come, people talk about this zone 3. They talk about that the dry Purulia and Bankura and parts of West Midnapur. But no, with all layers we considered, and we could figure out that this particular zone is the most critical zone which one should take care of. And so this is so if I so I'd like to come up with a kind of a case study, because this would cover zone 1 and zone 2, and this case would talk about mostly on our experience in participatory groundwater management for this particular zone. So I'm sorry that there's a small video. Let me check if it works. And so this is in the vernacular local language, but would give a sense that the particular area which we were working in. So I'd give a 2-liner summary on that, and so let's have a look at what is exactly the issue at the grassroots. So can you hear the voice?
Yes, sir. So could you just wrap up? We are actually running quite late. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just a second. So this is a kind of a very common scenario in the coastal delta, and so to give a summary to it, that these are the concerns which we could figure out, that increasing exploitation of freshwater aquifers, and then kind of a greater borewell depth. We kept on drilling, and then tree water quality, and then recharge and age of the groundwater in this region. So so this was the area where we undertook this participatory groundwater management together along with Aquadam, and then later on we worked with British Geological Survey and National Institute of Hydrology, Roorkee. So these are the basic steps which we could follow in this. So you have the time, no? At least 2-3 minutes.
Sure, Sachin.
Yeah. So this is a completely community-driven work where mostly to understand the groundwater aquifers and the groundwater, even the lithology of that particular area, where the layers are, and what is the fate of different layers, what is the water quality issues. Even they have used the traces to figure out and which data carries what meaning to them was the very kind of a crucial part to it. So initially some kind of bringing people together in the who lead the policy. Then we could select the Gram Panchayat, and then Gram Panchayat level functionaries were trained and they were brought together under the confidence. And then Gram Samsad wise some sort of sensitization program, why we are doing this participatory groundwater management program and what does it mean. And then there were the volunteers, mostly the lady volunteers, and who were trained later on that what they need to do, and then what are the data they are going to collect and how they can collect the data and which data has what meaning. So and then gradually they have come up with the data for 3 years, and then every year we have a kind of an annual workshop where people categorically looking into the data, and they used to interpret that the meaning of that particular data. And then so the 3-year this study has given them the idea that how they would like to go forward with the in terms of aquifer management and management of the groundwater of their particular area. So there were 18 cadres. So we started with some 1663 wells of a particular Gram Panchayat in the coastal delta, and there are 18 and they learned this comprehensive inventory and socio-hydrological survey. Quarterly, they used to monitor all 120 water sources. Out of these 1663, we stratified the samples based on their depth and their other parameters. And then we also had we also had this water quality testing, and the most critical inputs were cross-checked with the people who take care of the drilling work in this particular region, who were actually, so we had all the ongoing boring samples we are having, kind of soil texture. We also had to we checked it, and we also had categorically we measured this static water level of that. We also conducted this pumping test to know the property of the aquifer materials in that particular area. So as I was saying, that 1663 wells we started with, then we classified them, and then building the capacity of the women from the community took the data. Then we had the baseline data, and then for intensive monitoring we had 120 wells which we worked out with. So this is a kind of a conceptual diagram we could come up with based on the data we had, and this tallied actually. So we started with some aquifers at the shallow level, and some properties of the aquifer materials were also studied. And currently, so in a kind of a villager's language, that we are exploiting this particular layer of aquifer, which is at a depth of around 1,000 feet. And because we have already dried up the available two depths, two aquifers which we had. And this has also impacted some sort of policy kind of work, because the Gram Panchayats and the blocks, they have restricted the installation of the wells in that particular depth. So here also this is a kind of a development mapping of groundwater in that particular sample area, and this has mostly taken place mostly in the last 10 years, as we could see this. So we have used the static data and wanted to get a sense using this for 16 outputs of that particular Gram Panchayat to identify the recharge area. But mostly this is indicating the pattern of groundwater flow for the unconfined aquifers which we had. But we are having that this confined aquifers across as well. So yeah, there are some issues which we are yet to deal with in a large scale, that where the recharge zone is and how the recharge is taking place. Somebody talks about Sundarban recharge are very typically, somebody says that it's getting recharged far away at Krishnanagar. Somebody says Hooghly River is supplying the sweet water, fresh water to this aquifer. So now this has to be figured out, which we are looking forward to, and we are carrying out work in other parts of the data. So, so this was the for the Sundarban area, and for the coastal for the Himalayan areas, we categorically are having we have taken this village water security issue in a sense. And if you look into this conceptual diagram, that our fields we have the springs, and you coming further down, then you have open wells in the foothills of it in the Himalayas. And if you are going down further, the people are also installing the deep tube wells to take the water. So groundwater management essentially would be about not simply the recharge program, but also managing this available water sources in all level of the aquifers to secure. So this is I have talked about mostly the recharge and management of the groundwater, which we have subdivided it in packages to scale this up, both in coastal delta and in the Himalayas. And so these are package one on training the community barefoot technicians or barefoot hydrogeologists, then mapping the water balance, then monitoring the entire water points, and stratifying them for intensive study, coming up with the aquifer management plan and protocols to finding out the recharge areas and the activities, and then validation of them, data management and dissemination, and then impact assessment and the technological solutions, which we are taking this up in a large scale with the state government for both the areas. And we are looking forward to have a kind of a protocol for this particular state to work with. So this is about our experience. Say that we have to prioritize if we are really looking forward to only recharge, or we should essentially work on the water footprint or water use efficiencies. Because in a given hydrogeological boundary, if we take the precipitation as the input to that particular boundary, and then after all the losses, you have the water available at the surface and the ground, so you are going to get that as the output of it, output of that water. So the output by input into 100 gives you the larger level efficiency of that particular catchment or of that particular hydrogeological boundary. Now drilling down to the household level, as I could see that Himanshu's presentation was stating that no use of water for agriculture, for biomass creation, for livestock, for household use. Now can we come up with a kind of a water mark sheet for the households, that see your efficiency is this much and is displayed at the village using a digital display board, that these are the households which are running through 60% of the water footprint or water use efficiency in terms of their agriculture, in terms of their household use, in terms of their biomass production use. So that is going to be much more interesting where the investment has to be made. Should we really make the investments on recharge, or because the aquifers have their own capacities. You can't keep on increasing the recharge provisions for the aquifers. So one has to also take care of that to work towards the enhancing this water footprint or water use efficiencies in a given any unit area or any hydrogeological boundary. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would request Ashish sir from Srijan to present. He is looking after the Biwal program in Bundelkhand region. He is an agriculture region engineer, and he has experience in integrated natural resource management planning, implementation with community participation and climate smart agriculture of more than 10 years. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'll be starting. So please let me know if the screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible. We would request you to keep it a little short because we are running short of time. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Good evening to everyone. And first of all, thank you for providing this opportunity to share our experience of Biwal with you all. So basically, I'm myself Ashish and I'm from Sweden, and we are working with SIS consortium partner in Bundelkhand region under the umbrella of Bundelkhand Initiative for Water, Agriculture and Livelihood. So basically, Bundelkhand is a rain-fed drought-prone area, which is consisting of 14 districts of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, and it sees high migration and loss of livelihood due to water scarcity. Earlier, during the 8th century and 12th century, there were multiple, around 8,000 traditional water bodies were constructed during the ruling of Bundela and Chandela. So Biwal is, at its name, itself self-defined itself. We are working on water, agriculture, and livelihood. So we are putting up an attempt to revive the traditional water bodies across Bundelkhand and how with the collaboration of geo NGOs, and we have selected 110 tanks for restoration in across 8 districts. And this consortium is led by Srijan. So in the first phase, we have worked in 4 districts of UP and 3 districts of MP, and 52 tanks were restored across 49 villages, and which the silt from the tanks were directly applied in the farmer field. So basically, Bundelkhand, it is it has a hilly topography. Geologically, if you see, it has a granite zone mostly, and the first order aquifer is more suitable for irrigation. If you go by depth, the bore wells are not very successful. So these traditional water bodies are not only source of irrigation to the farmers, also providing as an important source for recharging their drinking water sources. So how did we do that? So basically, in Biwal, uh, we we worked with community-driven approach to restoration of tanks, in which silt were directly applied from the tank to the farmer's field. This has resulted in increase in the storage capacity of the tanks, also increase in the water holding capacity of the soil, and also it has resulted in increase in groundwater recharge in the local geological conditions. So basically, in this program, most of the contribution is from the community side. Around 69 to 70% of the contribution is came from the community part, whereas 30 to 31% is from the program support. So this is the one of the story of one of the village we have worked in, Alopa village of Tikamgarh district. If you can see, in June itself there was no water, and this well is just below this tank in which we were working in last year during month of May. And now after desiltation, if you see the impact, that still there is water during in the excavated area of the tank, and people are able to fetch water from the drinking for their drinking purposes. So these tanks are not only supporting their agriculture, providing critical irrigation to their agriculture crop, but also supporting in getting drinking water around the year. So the most important thing in working on these structures is a strengthening of the community institutions. So we have worked on strengthening of TMCs, Tank Management Committee, whenever the tank, whenever we say tank is the ecosystem which consists of the catchment area, tank itself, and the command area. So the community is consisting of the all three stakeholder farmers and the persons who are livelihood depend on tank, and it has its governing body where these TMCs are being groomed and strengthened to work on water management issues, work on their cropping patterns, and convergence with the local administration such as PRIs, Gram Panchayat, Gram, for working on infrastructure and promoting water infrastructure in their villages. So we are also working with these TMCs on strengthening their capacity on understanding of water, correlating it with the rainfall, and having a in-depth discussion on treatment of catchment area and command area of these tanks. So we played various games like some we have learned from FES as well during our field trainings. We are also taking data on well monitoring data with community, and also we have installed rain gauge in certain specific villages where we are capturing rainfall, so that we are also displaying it in the local terms in village level, so that people can correlate between the rainfall, water in their tanks, and also the fluctuation in open wells, so that they can correlate between these three, develop a better understanding, and go for a better cropping system in their village. Apart from that, we are also working with the TMCs on promoting other structures as well, such as we have constructed 88 tohas across 5 districts with a water potential of around 13,000 cubic meter. This is supposed to help in both ways, also to provide critical irrigation to the Rabi crop, also help in recharging the nearby open wells around the first order, second order streams. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would request Ms. Nikita Das from University at Buffalo to present. She is actually currently interested in public interest-oriented research in lines with applied anthropology. Her research at the University of Buffalo entails understanding the socioeconomic implications of renewable energy integration through the use of anthropological tools, especially in the context of electricity, agriculture, and water nexus.
I personally, I'm completely overwhelmed with the amount of information that I've received. I think it's really insightful. Thank you so much for inviting me. So there were just a couple of points that I wanted to make, especially because I have a background in electricity. So I was thinking about the water, understanding the groundwater management perspective from the perspective of electricity per se. And what I feel like, what I think we've already a lot of you have discussed about demand side management as well as managing extraction. But I also feel like when we're talking about managing extraction, electricity plays such an important role because historical trends have shown that with subsidy provision, electricity-based subsidy provision, there has been a sudden, there have been rise in groundwater depletion across the country, in all of the various states. So I think the case of West Bengal, which is definitely an outlier when it comes to electricity subsidy, because West Bengal does not provide a lot of electricity-based subsidy. We could see that when the Groundwater Management Act was brought in 2005, West Bengal was one of the few states which actually had which was very, very stringent about providing electricity connections. So it was extremely, although this of course played out in a negative way as well, let's say, but I think it also helped in providing the state leverage with regard to the amount of groundwater that usage that was happening in the state at that point. Of course, this cannot we cannot disregard the fact that this was also curtailing access from electricity connections. So what I was thinking was with regard to, of course, this is an academic perspective, and I think I have so much respect for the work you all are doing. So what I was thinking that is definitely one thing that we can consider is how should we create and channel funds from electricity subsidy provision per se towards more, towards methodologies or kind of systems or frameworks that kind of promote water case studies across the country. And I can think of one in Maharashtra where actually they considered, where they did this, I think it was Hivre, actually, which did a lot of work on their employment guarantee system, and they kind of use that, the funds for that in water conservation essentially, and actually that helped in improving their livelihoods, improve their economic conditions. So and in addition to that, the other point I wanted to make was with regard to how even in the long run, I think cooperatives. I mean, for instance, in solar pumps, I mean, you have this case of the Dhundi model, which was introduced by IWMI in Gujarat, and essentially the idea was to create solar pumps. Um, uh, okay, thank you, sir. Saikat sir. So basically, the idea was to basically incorporate these solar, where there were a group of small or marginal farmers that actually own a solar pump together, and that kind of helps in you're not, and also the fact that when you are using the solar for extracting water, you also have an incentive to sell the electricity back to the grid. So essentially, it's creating an alternative income as well. So uh, a mechanism which can self-regulate farmers, like examples, like great examples, anecdotal examples that all of you have shared. I think that's also definitely one way forward. But overall, all in all, I just wanted to conclude by saying that in the long run, I think subsidy provision is definitely a huge thing, and we need to, because it can impact financial conditions of government institutions like the distribution companies who have to bear the brunt of these delays in subsidies. So in the long run, I think subsidy provisions have to be phased out, and finding ways in which subsidy provision can be phased out is definitely something that we need to consider. And yeah, I think I'm going to end it there. And of course, yeah, the final point that I wanted to make was with regard to I think overall collaborations where we are bringing in the expertise of water sector as well as electricity together to kind of put forth policy advocacy on both these sectors. That is important because both of them work in tandem. If you have sudden increase in water permits, I mean water electricity connection permits, that's going to have a direct impact on groundwater depletion. So yeah, I think that's all I had to add. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Now, I would request Shri Rahul Bakare from Board Charger to present. He is the director of Board Charger. He is a passionate innovator and expert in urban and rural water management with specialization in application of IT and IoT in groundwater.
Rahulji, you're on mute if you're trying to say something.
I think we have lost Rahulji. So now I would request Vinay sir to give his closing comments.
Rahulji, are you still with us? I think Rahulji's dropped off. We'll if Rahulji is back, then we can quickly. But I'm very happy to. This was an incredible, just an incredible session, and I can't thank all of you enough for. Please, Himanshuji, I've seen you're on mute,
Yeah.
Himanshuji. Yeah.
So Vinay, I presume I was kind of looking at the schedule, And I believe we haven't heard from Ravindra from Vasan.
Correct. Ravindra ji is here. There was a bit of a misunderstanding, I believe. I did do. Now I see there was an email. I thought Ravindra ji was not able to join, but I'm really happy that Ravindra ji you're able to join. Ravindra ji, would love to hear from you.
I'm sorry for the confusion, Vinay, but I was actually onto some other job which I had to complete, so I could not join. But Himanshu asked, so I can't
No, really
say
happy you
anything.
could join, Ravindra ji. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for thank you so much for
So
joining.
yeah. Just 2 points, Vinay. When you are looking at Eastern India and groundwater, um, I think what is the issue about availability or the management. If it is a question of availability, then the whole aspects relate to availability. But if it's fundamentally about the management, that creates a problem. Then we have to address in the management issue. Third is usage. Hmm? Between these three, availability, management, and usage. Usage is also part of management. I think we need to look at Eastern India groundwater thing. So the tendency now we are seeing in sort of north coastal AP, the tribal areas, and then a joint tribal areas of Odisha, and even further up. So there is a tendency to going for groundwater extraction, bore wells. I am not sure whether bore wells is anyway good for that region. We learned from Himanshu that no, it will be disastrous if they go for borewells. And then, if not borewells, what? This is something that we need to flag and then have a view on what do you mean by water management in Eastern. Sorry, there's a lot of noise around. Just a minute, let me. Yeah, sorry. So this is one aspect. Second aspect is when you look at Eastern India and then agriculture. I think what is that we need water for, apart from drinking water for livestock and humans. I think what is the purpose of water? Where should water be give the highest marginal productivity? If you look at it, that is in actually increasing the cropping intensity and plugging the drought spells. So instead of looking at water, I think we should look at soil water balance as the parameter that need to be monitored and that need to be managed. If you actually peg your science and then metrics and management and investment subsidies around soil and around managing soil moisture balances, then I think we can to economy and also largest returns over public investments. So what do I mean by soil moisture balances? Is essentially, if you look at the soil moisture across the year, and then which is primarily replenished by rainwater, and you keep supplementing that with water that is available because these are all high rainfall regions. Then you will have a crop pattern and cropping intensity that is much higher than what we have now. So that actually provides a growth impetus in this region. I think all that I'm saying is, no, we need to have a framework for understanding. I mean, you can't see groundwater as separate from water per se in eastern areas. So essentially, the meeting point is the soil moisture. So if you peg around soil moisture and build the policies and then systems and then investments, then I think a new vision can be evolved. This is what I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very nice session. And if there's anyone who wants to put any point, who hasn't spoken earlier, can also speak now. And if there is any question, we are ready to take that as well.
Yes. Quickly, I have a one response, not a question or something. That so what Nikita was saying about this West Bengal Groundwater Act, no act was restricting withdrawal of the groundwater. So I request you not to follow the academic research, right? So because based on very limited number of inspection well data, now West Bengal Groundwater Act was amended on 9th November 2011, and which was a major mistake from the government's point of view based on certain insane recommendations, right? So we had 38 plus 1 semi-critical block in the year 2012, and the next groundwater census 9 semi-critical blocks in terms of groundwater development and groundwater status is concerned. So in a sense that so that particular amendment gave you the freedom to withdraw groundwater without any permission from any authority using 5 horsepower pump for agriculture purpose, and with a very limited number of unprocessed and raw data. That particular conclusion was made without any debate in the assembly, direct, which was issued to amend that particular act, and the effect was horrible in the very next year. So actually the feedback from the field was very different. Feedback was that no, you are not allowed to do that much of groundwater development, which some people are suggesting. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request every one of you to switch on the camera if it's possible for you, so that we can click a picture and post it on the social media. Thank you.
This, I believe, is some of the brightest minds. I'm quite confident some of the brightest minds working on water in the country. So really happy to be part of this, and I'm going to cherish this for a long time to come. And what I'm really excited about is the opportunity to be able to work with and keep learning from all of you and join hands in. And I again want to thank you all so much for being part of this in a short notice. And I hope we can all learn from each other and keep working with each other. Thank you so much. If there is any final comment or any closing thoughts from any of you, please feel free to share. Please add to this. Otherwise, we can close for the day. Thank you so much once again. It was lovely to meet all of you, and look forward to being in touch again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.